Hello, friends. We are very interested to know which cities you are listening to us from, so quickly like and write in the comments where you are from. Also share what shocking stories happened in your city or maybe even with you personally. Subscribe because the next story could be about your city or even your personal drama. Now let's dive into a new exciting story. Lubbock, Texas, July 1995. The sun hung above the horizon like a red-hot copper coin, burning everything that came under its rays. 10-year-old John Mitchell stood on a makeshift baseball field, just a patch of land behind an old barn where local boys kicked the dust off their sneakers while chasing their dreams. His sneakers, worn with a hole in the big toe, creaked on the dry soil. In his hands he clutched a bat, a wooden one, darkened with age, with his father's initials carved. TM, it was his only treasure, a gift from a man who had once been a hero. "Come on, Johnny, hit!" the father shouted from the edge of the field. Tom Mitchell, tall, wiry, with sun-bleached hair, stood with his arms crossed. His voice, hoarse from whiskey and cigarettes, trembled with pride. Tom was a former minor league player whose career was cut short by a shoulder injury back in 1982. He told this story hundreds of times, how the ball hit him badly during the game in Oklahoma, how the bone cracked, and his dreams of the major leagues dissolved in the hospital room. Now he lived in the past, teaching his son what he loved most in the world. John narrowed his eyes at Tim Wilkes, a lanky, freckled boy who thought he was the king of the field. Tim grinned, tossing the ball in his hand as if to tease. He was a year older and liked to remind him of this. The ball flew out of his hand fast, curved, with a sneaky spin that he had been practicing for the past month. John gripped the bat tighter, feeling the sweat running down his neck and soaking his old Ranger's t-shirt. He held his breath, waiting for the moment. Hit. The dull crack of wood against the skin of the ball echoed across the field, and the white dot soared upward, flying behind the barn like a rocket launched into the endless Texas sky. The boys screamed, someone whistled, and John rushed towards the bases, raising a cloud of dust that settled on his hair and jeans. "Home run," the father yelled, clapping his hands so loudly that the sound echoed off the rusty walls of the barn. "This is my boy. I told you, he has magic in his hands." John stood at home base, breathing heavily. My heart was beating like a drum, and my smile stretched from ear to ear. He looked at his father, he nodded, and in that nod there was everything. Approval, hope, a promise that John would one day do what Tom could not. The boys around him patted him on the back. Tim Wilkes kicked a pebble to the side, muttering something about luck, but John didn't hear. At that moment, he was on top of the world, the small, dusty world of Lubbock, where baseball was the only light in an endless series of hot days. At home, everything was different. Their mother, Linda, was waiting for them with dinner, potatoes and gravy, a piece of tough meat that she stretched out for 3 days, and a glass of tap water that tasted of iron. She worked as a nurse at the local hospital, an old building with peeling paint that was proudly called a medical center, even though it didn't even have an X-ray machine. Every evening she returned with tired eyes and the smell of disinfectant on her hands, which John hated but never talked about it. He loved her quiet strength, her ability to keep the family afloat, despite the fact that her father was at the bar more often than at home. But he was afraid of her silence. Linda rarely talked about dreams, only about bills, how to pay for electricity or fix an old pickup truck that was coughing up black smoke. "You're covered in dirt again," she said, placing the plate in front of him. Her voice was soft, but with a hint of reproach that cut deeper than she could have imagined. "Baseball won't feed you, Johnny. It's just a game." "He'll feed you," the father snapped, throwing his fork on the table with such force that the gravy splashed onto the tablecloth. "He will be a star. Better than me. You just don't understand." Linda remained silent, but her look said it all. She didn't believe it, not because she didn't love John, but because she knew that dreams rarely survive. She saw how baseball broke Tom, not just his shoulder, but his soul. He returned from that trip to Oklahoma a different man, angry, drinking, with eyes that no longer had fire in them. Linda did not want her son to repeat this fate, but how to tell this to a boy who looked at his father as a god. "Eat," she finally said, turning to the sink. "Tomorrow is school, and then you need to help me with the garden." John nodded, but his thoughts were far away. At night, he lay in his room small, with cracked wallpaper and a window that never closed completely. The wind rattled the shutters, bringing the smell of dry earth and distant rain that never came. He imagined himself in a large stadium, under the roar of the stands, with a bat in his hands. I saw the ball flying over the horizon, my father patting him on the shoulder, and my mother finally smiling, not that tired smile, but a real one, full of pride. This was his first dream, pure, simple, like that July day when he first felt that he could be something more than just a boy from Lubbock. As the years passed, the field behind the barn gave way to a school stadium. John grew tall, strong, with hands made for a bat. By age 12, he had outgrown Tim Wilkes, who was now throwing balls with less aplomb. By 15, he was a star for the Lubbock High Westerns. His name began to be whispered in the stands, and local newspapers wrote headlines like, "Mitchell is the future of Texas." My father came to every game, even when he was swaying from whiskey. He stood at the fence, shouted the loudest, and bought John a Coke in a can after the game, telling old stories about his days in the minor leagues. "Do you see, Johnny?" he said, clapping his son on the shoulder. "This is your time. You'll get out of here. You will become a legend." But that same year, everything changed. Tom left. He simply packed his bag and disappeared, leaving a note on the kitchen table. "Sorry, son, I can't take it anymore." Linda found her in the morning while John was still sleeping. She sat at the table, clutching the paper in her hands, and cried quietly, so as not to wake her son. She did not leave the house for 3 days, and John did not ask where his father had gone. He knew. Part of him died the moment he saw the empty chair at the table and his mother's red eyes. After that, he stopped talking about baseball at home. He played silently, furiously, as if each blow was revenge for betrayal, for the fact that his father chose the bottle instead of his family. My school years flew by quickly. By the age of 18, his name was booming throughout Texas. College scouts fought for him, calling him in the evenings, promising scholarships and fame. Linda looked at this with concern, but did not interfere. She knew that she would not stop her son. There was too much fire in him, too much of Tom. As a result, John chose the University of Texas at Austin, not the most prestigious, but with a strong baseball program. He left Lubbock with only one bag and a bat, the one with the initials TM that he never threw away. A new life awaited him in Austin. Austin, Texas, August 2003. The air was thick with heat and the smell of cut grass when John Mitchell first stepped onto the University of Texas campus. He was 18, carrying a tattered duffel bag stuffed with clothes, a pair of sneakers, and the same bat with the initials TM that he couldn't leave behind in Lubbock. The campus was buzzing with students running back and forth, carrying boxes into the dorms, laughing, hugging, as if the whole world was at their feet. John felt like a stranger. Lubbock had taught him to be quiet and work, but here everything was too loud, too lively. But he didn't come here for friends, he came for baseball. He was drafted by the Texas Longhorns on a scholarship, which was a miracle for a guy from a town where most people ended up working on oil rigs. Coach Bill Hartman, a stocky man with gray temples and a voice like a truck horn, met him at his first practice. He looked John over as if assessing a bull at the market and muttered, "Mitchell, huh? I heard you hit like a damn truck. Show what you can do or go home." John nodded, gripping his bat. The field was no match for the dusty patch behind the barn green, well-groomed, with stands that could seat thousands. He stepped into the batter's position, feeling the sweat already pooling under his cap. The first pitcher, a lanky guy named Cody Raines, threw the ball fast, straight, with a slight whistle. John struck without hesitation. The crack of the bat echoed across the field, and the ball flew over the fence, landing somewhere in the bushes outside the stadium. Cody cursed and Hartman chuckled. "Not bad," said the coach, spitting the gum into the grass. "But don't be arrogant. Everyone here is like that." It was a lie, and John knew it. By the end of the week, he became the team's starting batter. His blows were not just strong, they were precise, as if he saw the trajectory of the ball even before the throw. The coach called it instinct, but for John, it was the rage driven inside after his father left, the pain that he turned into strength. Each home run was a blow to the past, to a note saying, "Sorry, son," to an empty chair at the table. Life in Austin was different. The dorm was a cramped room with 2 beds, where his roommate, a fat guy named Rick, snored so hard the walls shook. Studying was difficult. John had never been a bookworm, and lectures on history or algebra seemed to him a waste of time. But he held on for the sake of the scholarship, for the right to take the field. He made friends slowly. The team accepted him, but with caution. He was quiet, reserved, not one to brag or get drunk at parties. He was respected for his game, but not understood. By the spring of 2004, his name began to buzz off campus. The Longhorns won several key games and John was in the spotlight. After one game, where he hit 3 home runs in a row, a man in a wrinkled jacket approached him, a scout from the minor leagues. He handed John a business card and said, "You have a chance, boy. Keep it up, and you'll be in the MLB in a couple of years." John hid the business card in his jeans pocket and said nothing. He didn't believe in promises. He remembered too well how his father swore that everything would work out, and then disappeared. But the scout's words lit a spark in him. He began to train even harder, spending hours on the field after practice, practicing his shots until his arms began to shake from fatigue. It was then, in his second year, that he met Emmy Carter. This happened in March 2005, after a game against the Oklahoma Sooners. The Longhorns won 8-3, with John scoring 2 points. After the game, the team went to the Rusty Spur Bar, a noisy place with sticky tables and the smell of beer. John sat in the corner with a bottle of Lone Star, watching his comrades get drunk and sing songs. He didn't like such gatherings, but Rick dragged him along, declaring that heroes shouldn't sit at home. She walked in as if the stage had been staged for her alone. Emmy Carter is tall, with long blonde hair that falls in waves over her shoulders, wearing a denim skirt and a white t-shirt that highlights her tan. Her eyes, bright blue, caught the light of the neon sign, and John froze. She was not just beautiful, she was from another world. She had a friend with her, a petite brunette, but all eyes were on Emmy. "It's that girl from Dallas," Rick whispered, nudging John with his elbow. "They say her dad sells cars like hot cakes, and she herself is the queen of parties." John nodded without looking away. Emmy noticed him, or maybe she just felt his gaze. She walked up to their table, holding a glass of something pink and fizzy in her hand, and smiled. "Are you the guy who hits balls like they hurt him?" she asked. Her voice was light, with a slight mockery. John blinked, not immediately finding the words. Rick laughed, slamming the table, but John forced himself to answer. "Maybe. Who are you?" "Emmy Carter," she said, extending her hand as if it were a handshake at a business meeting. Her nails were painted pink and perfectly straight. "I heard you are a star. I decided to see for myself." He shook her hand, feeling her skin soft and cool in contrast to his calloused palm. Something in her tone, a mixture of interest and challenge, caught him. They started talking. She said that she is studying at the Faculty of Communications and dreams of working on television, maybe even in Los Angeles. He listened, nodding, but thought about how strange she looked here, among the sweaty athletes and cheap beer. Emmy was like an expensive car in an old pickup truck's garage, beautiful, but out of place. At the end of the evening, she wrote down her number on a napkin and slipped it into his jeans pocket. "Call me if you want to show me how the balls are hit," she said with a wink, and walked away, leaving a trail of vanilla perfume behind her. John watched her leave, feeling his heart beat faster than any home run. The next months were a whirlwind. John and Emmy started dating. She came to his games, sat in the stands in sunglasses and short shorts, clapping when he scored. After games, they walked around Austin, eating tacos at taco joints and driving around in his old Ford, which he bought for $500 from a neighbor. Emmy loved to talk about the future, how they would live in a big house, travel, how she would become a news anchor, and he would become an MLB star. John listened, smiled, but inside he felt anxious. Her dreams were bright, but alien. All he wanted was baseball, pure, simple, like in childhood. By the summer of 2006, he had become the Longhorns' best player. Major League scouts began calling more often, and Hartman said, "One more year, Mitchell, and you will sign a contract. Don't screw it up." John nodded, but the pressure was growing. Emmy also changed. She started talking about money, about how her father bought a new Mercedes, how her friend married a lawyer from Houston. Austin, Texas, May 2007. The spring air was filled with the scent of blooming magnolia trees and freshly cut grass as John Mitchell walked onto Dish Falk Field for the last time as a member of the Texas Longhorns. He was 22, and it was the finale of his collegiate career, a match against the Baylor Bears for a spot in the NCAA regional tournament. The stands were buzzing, filled with students in orange t-shirts, parents with cameras, and scouts sitting with notepads and whispering like a flock of crows. John felt their gazes like needles on his skin, but tried not to think about it. His job was simple, to hit, and he beat. The first inning passed in a blur. He stepped into the batter's box, clutching the bat, a new, sleek one that Coach Hartman had given him for his birthday. The Bears' pitcher, a burly guy with a red beard, threw a fastball fast, low, just outside the strike zone. John struck without hesitation. The crack echoed throughout the stadium, and the ball soared upward, flying over the center fence. Home run. The crowd roared, and Hartman, standing on the sidelines, spat out his gum and nodded, his version of praise. By the fifth inning, the score was 5-2 in favor of the Longhorns, and John added another home run, and then a single that brought two teammates on base. By the ninth inning, the game was in the bag, 8-3. When he scored the final run, the stand stood up, chanting, "Mitchell, Mitchell." He took off his cap, wiped the sweat from his forehead, and looked at Emmy. She sat in the front row, wearing a white sundress and sunglasses, clapping with a smile that seemed both sincere and rehearsed. Next to her was her father, Richard Carter, wearing an expensive polo shirt and a watch that cost more than John's mother's annual salary. Richard nodded at him, as if approving the purchase at auction. After the game, Hartman took John aside. His voice was hoarse, as always, but there was a rare warmth in it. "You did it, boy," he said, clapping John on the shoulder. "Tomorrow morning they will come to you with a contract. The Texas Rangers want you in the minor leagues, but that's just the beginning. Don't screw it up." John nodded, feeling his stomach tighten. It was a moment he had dreamed of since he was a child, since those dusty days behind the barn in Lubbock. But instead of joy, he felt heaviness, as if someone had placed a stone on his chest. He thanked the coach and went to the stands where Emmy was waiting for him. "You were incredible," she said, throwing her arms around his neck. Her hair smelled like vanilla, and her skin was cool despite the heat. "Dad says that you are now officially a star." "Not yet," John muttered, trying to smile. "This is only the minor league." "Minor league today, MLB tomorrow," Richard chimed in, holding out his hand. His grip was firm and businesslike. "I knew you'd go far, son. The main thing is to keep your head on your shoulders." The next day, two men in suits, representatives of the Texas Rangers, were waiting for him in Hartman's office. One, balding and red-faced, identified himself as Mike Jenkins, the scouting manager. The second, young, with a sharp look, was a lawyer. They laid out the papers on the table, and Mike spoke. "We are offering you a 2-year contract with the Rough Riders, our team in Class A. The starting salary is $50,000 per year, plus a signing bonus of $100,000. If you prove yourself, in a year or two, you will rise to AAA, and then it's a stone's throw to the major leagues." John looked at the numbers printed on the paper. $100,000. His mother earned $20,000 a year working 12 hours at the hospital. He could buy her a new house, a car, send her on vacation, everything she never dared to dream about. But he knew that this was just the beginning, and that the money could disappear as quickly as it came. "I'm in," he said, taking the pen. His signature was clumsy. He rarely wrote anything longer than a shopping list, but it didn't matter. The contract was signed. Mike patted him on the back, the lawyer put away the papers, and an hour later John was calling his mother. "Mom, I did it," he said, standing at a payphone on campus. "I'm a professional now." Linda was silent for several seconds, and then her voice trembled. "I'm proud of you, Johnny. Just be careful. You know how it was with your father." He squeezed the phone tighter. She rarely mentioned Tom, but her words always hit the mark. He promised that he would be careful and hung up, feeling euphoria mixed with anxiety. The summer of 27 was a time of change. John moved to Frisco, a suburb of Dallas where the Rough Riders were based. His apartment was small, with bare walls and a creaky bed, but to him it was a palace. Emmy came almost every weekend, bringing with her suitcases of clothes and bottles of wine that he could not drink. She graduated with a degree in communications and got a job as an intern at a local TV station in Dallas, but her real passion was partying and hooking up. She loved to talk about her colleagues, about how she would one day become a presenter, and John listened, nodding, although he didn't remember half of the names. Their relationship had become serious by that time, at least it seemed so from the outside. Emmy often stayed overnight with him, and her things gradually filled his apartment. Shoes by the door, cosmetics in the bathroom, a dress on the back of a chair. She was part of his new life, bright and loud, like fireworks. But sometimes he caught himself thinking that he didn't know what she really wanted from him. By August, he asked her to marry him. This happened spontaneously after another victory for the Riders. He hit 2 home runs, and the crowd chanted his name. After the game, he and Emmy sat in a pickup truck in an empty stadium parking lot, eating Whataburger burgers and looking at the stars. John turned to her and said, "Marry me." She froze, burger in hand, and looked at him as if in disbelief. "Are you serious?" she asked, narrowing her eyes. "Yes," he answered, surprising himself at his determination. "I love you. Let's do this." Emmy laughed, tossed the burger onto a napkin, and hugged him. "Okay, John Mitchell, but the ring must be with a diamond." He nodded, although he only had $200 in his pocket, and the bonus for the contract had already been spent on rent and a new set of equipment. But he promised himself that he would find the money. Emmy deserved it, or at least he thought so. The wedding took place in December 2007 in Dallas. Richard Carter insisted on paying for everything from the country club's rent to the open champagne bar. John felt out of place among guests in expensive suits and women with perfect hairstyles. His mother arrived from Lubbock in a simple blue dress and stayed away all evening, sipping lemonade. When she hugged John before the ceremony, her eyes were wet. "Are you happy?" she asked quietly. "Yes, Mom," he answered, although there was a lump in his throat. Emmy looked stunning in a white dress with a long train that cost more than his year's salary. She smiled like a movie star, posed for photos, and danced with her father to a jazz band. John looked at her and thought that this was his victory, not only the contract, but also her, the girl he could not dream of in Lubbock. By the spring of 2008, John had become a Rough Riders star. His statistics, his average home run slugging percentage per season attracted the attention of major league managers. Emmy, now Mrs. Mitchell, insisted on moving to a new apartment in Dallas with a view of the city center and a rent of $2,000 a month. She began to buy expensive things, bags, shoes, jewelry, which John did not understand, but paid for. His salary grew. By the end of the year, he was offered an LA contract with Round Rock Express for $150,000 a year, but the money was gone faster than he could count it. Emmy loved to throw parties. Their apartment became a gathering place for her friends, journalists, models, businessmen, whom she called helpful acquaintances. John would come home from training tired, with sore shoulders, and find the house full of strangers. One day, he found her in the living room, laughing with some guy in an expensive suit who held her hand for too long. When the guests left, he asked, "Who was it?" "Just a friend," she answered with a shrug. "You need to relax, John. This is part of life, and you need to be able to maintain useful connections." He remained silent, but that night he did not sleep, looking at the ceiling. He loved her, but he was beginning to notice something in her smile, in her words, in the way she looked at him when she thought he couldn't see. Arlington, Texas, June 2010. Rangers ballpark was buzzing with 40,000 spectators. John Mitchell stood on the pitcher's mound, clutching the ball in his glove. He was 25 and in his second season in the major leagues with the Texas Rangers. Sweat dripped down his temples, soaking his blue no. 23 uniform. He took a deep breath, smelling grass and hot dogs and tension in the air. Tonight's game against the Houston Astros was a big one. The Rangers were fighting for a playoff spot, and all eyes were on him, their new star pitcher. John looked at the scoreboard. 4-3 in favor of the Rangers, eighth inning, 2 outs. The Astros batter, a burly guy with a neck tattoo, tapped his bat on the ground in preparation. John wiped his hand on his pant leg, nodded to the catcher, and threw a slider, fast and sharp, going down. The batter swung and missed. Strike. The crowd roared and John exhaled. Another throw, fastball, straight into the zone. The batter hit, but the ball went into the foul behind the stands. The third strike is a curvy ball, deceptive and accurate. The batter froze, the umpire threw up his hands, and the inning ended. John pulled off his cap, wiped his forehead, and walked to the bench to applause. "Great job, Mitchell," muttered the team's coach, Ron Washington, slapping him on the back. "Keep it like that until the end, and we're in the pocket." John nodded, sitting down on the bench. His shoulder ached, an old injury from endless practice in the minor leagues making itself known, but he didn't complain. In 2 years in the MLB, he became one of the league's best pitchers. An era of 2.89, 15 wins last season, a $5 million a year contract. He was on top, or so it seemed. After the game, he found Emmy in the player's family box. She stood at the bar in a tight red dress and stilettos, with a glass of white wine in her hand. Her hair, now with highlights, glistened under the light of the lamps. She was talking to someone, a tall man wearing jeans and a Dallas Cowboys t-shirt. John came closer, and the man turned around. Brandon Ross, Cowboys quarterback, NFL star with a face that has appeared in beer and truck commercials. His smile was snow white, and his handshake was too strong. "John Mitchell, huh?" Brandon said, slapping him on the shoulder. "Great match, man. You smeared them today." "Thanks," John replied, trying to sound friendly. He looked at Emmy. "Oh, we met at a charity event last month," she said, waving her hand. "Brandon sponsored an event for children. He's so generous." Brandon smiled wider, and John felt a pang in his chest. Not jealousy, not yet, but something vague, like a premonition. He nodded, grabbed a beer from the fridge, and sat next to Emmy, listening to her chat about the evening and Brandon telling NFL stories. John drank in silence, looking out at the field through the glass of the box. Something in her voice, too animated, too bright, made him wary. By the summer of 2010, their life with Emmy began to look like an expensive TV series. They lived in a large house in the suburbs of Dallas, a white mansion with columns, a swimming pool, and a 3-car garage. Emmy insisted on buying it, although John offered something more modest. "We're not beggars from Lubbock now," she said, and he relented. The house cost $1.2 million, and the mortgage ate up half of his salary, but Emmy was happy. She quit her job on television a year after the wedding, saying that the wives of stars should not run around for internships, and now took care of herself. Fitness, salons, shopping. John didn't mind. He wanted her to have everything. But cracks were already appearing. Emmy increasingly went to parties alone, returning late with a smell of wine and other people's perfume. She said that these were connections, that she needed to maintain status, but John noticed how her phone was flashing with messages, which she quickly put away. One day, he found a ticket to a Dallas Cowboys game in her bag. Not his game, but a football game. When he asked, she shrugged. "A friend invited me." "You don't like football, John?" He nodded, but the aftertaste remained. Brandon Ross began to appear in their lives more often. Emmy mentioned him in conversations. Brandon said, Brandon invited, with an ease that seemed too forced. John saw him a couple of times, at a mutual friend's party at a charity gala in Dallas. Brandon was loud, confident, and had a charisma that filled the room. John, on the contrary, was quiet, focused, accustomed to speaking with actions, not words. They were like night and day, and it was starting to bother him. One day in July, Emmy went to Houston for the weekend with her friends. John stayed at home. He had a series of home games. On Saturday, he returned from training earlier than usual and noticed that her car was in the garage, although it should have been 300 miles away. He entered the house quietly, feeling his heart pounding in his ears. Voices could be heard from the living room, her laughter and a deep male voice. John froze at the door. It was Brandon. They sat on the sofa, too close, with glasses of wine in their hands. Emmy was saying something, and Brandon was looking at her like she was a prize. "Emmy," John said, stepping inside. She shuddered, spilling wine on her dress. Brandon stood up, smiling as if nothing had happened. "Oh, John, hi. I dropped by to drop off an invitation to a charity match. Emmy said you're home, but I was at training," John snapped, looking at Emmy. "You should be in Houston." "Plans have changed," she said, standing up and wiping her dress with a napkin. Her voice was too high. "The girls canceled, and I decided to return." Brandon was nearby. John nodded, but didn't believe a word of it. Brandon said goodbye, slapping him on the shoulder, and left, leaving behind him a silence that hurt his ears. Emmy looked at John, crossing her arms. "What?" she asked. "Are you going to interrogate me?" "No," he said, although he wanted to. "It's just strange that you didn't say so." "I'm not your property, John," she said and went into the bedroom, slamming the door. He stood in the living room, looking at the wine stain on the carpet. This was the first time he felt like he was losing her, but he brushed it off. He loved her. She loved him. Everything else was just noise. The season ran its course. The Rangers made the playoffs, and John became a hero. His photos appeared in newspapers, fans chanted his name, and his salary increased to $7 million a year after a new contract. But at home, everything was different. Emmy began to disappear more often, citing meetings and projects. She made new friends, people from the world of sports and show business, whom John did not know and did not want to know. Their conversations became shorter and sharper. One day he asked, "Are you happy with me?" She looked at him as if he had said something stupid. "Of course, John. I want more." "We can afford more." "More than what?" he asked, but she did not answer, going to the mirror to fix her makeup. He began to suspect that more was not just about money. In August, he saw her with Brandon again in the parking lot of a restaurant where she had gone with her friends. They stood by his black Dodge, laughed, and Brandon hugged her goodbye a little longer than necessary. John was sitting in his pickup truck across the street. He didn't come out, didn't scream. He drove home and opened a beer, looking into the darkness. John sat in the backyard of their house, by the pool, under the starry sky, twirling a ball in his fingers. His heart beat in rhythm with Emmy's steps coming from the porch light, confident, accompanied by the jingle of keys. Her voice, soft and slightly playful, cut through the ears. "Yes, Brandon, we'll call you tomorrow." She entered the house without noticing his silhouette in the shadows, and John felt his insides tighten. He stood up, threw the ball aside. It splashed into the water with a dull splash, and stepped into the living room behind her. Emmy was taking off her shoes, still holding the phone to her ear, when he said, trying to keep his voice level, "I saw you with Brandon in the restaurant parking lot." "What was that?" She froze, slowly lowered the phone and turned. Her blue eyes narrowed. "Were you following me?" she said, crossing her arms. John shook his head. "I was driving by. You said you'd be with your friends." Emmy snorted, tossing her hair back. "Jesus, John, it was just dinner. He picked me up because Liz couldn't make it." "Do you seriously think I'm cheating on you?" Her voice rose, shaking with irritation. "You're paranoid," she blurted out, throwing her bag on the sofa. "I'm tired of your suspicions." John clenched his teeth, feeling anger boiling in his chest. "Then why are you lying? Why is he hugging you like you're more than just friends?" he barked. Emmy rolled her eyes, taking a step closer to him. "Because he's a normal person, and not a self-obsessed athlete. Maybe if you didn't live only for your game, I wouldn't be looking for someone to talk to." The words hit me like a slap in the face. They looked at each other in silence, interrupted only by the hum of the air conditioner, until Emmy turned away, muttering, "I'm going to bed." John stood there, staring at the closed bedroom door, feeling like he had just lost something important. Arlington, Texas, September 2011. Rangers ballpark was filled to capacity 48,000 people. Noise, floodlights, the smell of popcorn and beer in the air. John Mitchell stood on the pitcher's mound, clutching the ball in his glove. He was 26, and it was one of the most important games of his career, the regular season finale against the Los Angeles Angels. The Rangers were fighting for first place in the American League West, and a win today could lock them into the playoffs. John felt pressure not only from the team, but also from himself. The last months have been like running through a minefield. Quarrels with Emmy, her excuses, the shadow of Brandon Ross, which loomed ever closer. But on the field he could forget. It was just him, the ball and the goal. Seventh inning. The score is 3-2 in favor of the Rangers, 2 outs, a runner on first base. John wiped the sweat from his face as he looked at the Angels' batter, a sharp-eyed young guy who had already hit a single in the third inning. The catcher signaled, "Fastball high." John nodded, moved his hand, and threw it. The ball went a little to the side big. The crowd booed, and he cursed under his breath. The second throw is a slider, accurate, into the zone. The batter swung and missed. Strike. John exhaled, feeling his shoulder ache more than usual. He threw again, a curvy ball, deceptive, going down. The batter hit, but the ball went into the ground, and the shortstop picked it up, throwing out the runner at second base. 3 outs. The inning ended and John walked to the bench as the crowd roared. He sat down, reached for the water, and glanced at the family box. Emmy was there, wearing a black blouse and jeans, with a glass in her hand. She was talking to someone, laughing, but John couldn't see who. He was too far away. He brushed the thought aside, focusing on the game. There was a break ahead, and then his exit in the eighth. He had to control himself. The break began with the usual bustle. Music, mascots dancing, fans running for hot dogs. John stood up to stretch his shoulder when he noticed movement in the box. Emmy stood up, her blonde hair flashing in the spotlight, and she headed towards the exit. He followed her with his gaze. She went down the stairs, walked along the stands, and stopped at the barrier where the VIP guests stood. Brandon Ross was there, wearing a leather jacket and wearing that same white-toothed smile that John hated. Emmy walked up to him, and they hugged not briefly like friends, but long, intimately. And then she kissed him. Right there, in front of thousands of people, under the cameras that broadcast the match on the huge screen of the stadium. John froze. The world narrowed to this scene, her lips on his hand on her waist, their laughter as they pulled away. The crowd around began to buzz, someone whistled, but for John the sounds became dull, as if underwater. He felt the ball slip from his hand and fall to the ground. His comrades on the bench shouted something, but he did not hear. On the stadium screen, the same one that usually showed replays of his shots, now there was Emmy's face kissing Brandon, enlarged so that no one would miss it. "Mitchell, are you okay?" The catcher, Mike Napoli, shouted, slapping him on the shoulder. John didn't answer. He looked at the box, where Emmy had already returned to her seat, as if nothing had happened, straightening her hair. Brandon disappeared into the crowd. John clenched his fists, feeling the blood pounding in his temples. The eighth inning started in 5 minutes, but for John it was an eternity. He walked out onto the hill, his legs shaking like a beginner's. The Angels' first batter got into position as John tried to concentrate. He threw it fastball, too high. Ball. The second throw was a slider, but the hand shook and the ball went into the ground. Still sick. The crowd began to whisper, and Coach Washington frowned on the bench. John wiped his face, but his fingers were shaking, a tremor he hadn't had since he was a child and nervous before school games. The third throw is a curvy ball, weak, straight into the zone. The batter hit, and the ball went over the fence. Home run. The score was equal, 3-3. The stands groaned as John stood looking out at the empty field. He was replaced a minute later. Washington ran out onto the mound, muttering something about "get it together," and called for a reliever. John went into the dugout, feeling the crew's gaze. Napoli approached him, quietly asking, "What's wrong with you, dude? You looked like you'd seen a ghost." "It's okay," John lied, sitting up and hiding his face in his hands. But nothing was normal. The Rangers lost the game 4-3 in the 10th inning, and the blame lay with him. After the game, reporters surrounded him in the locker room, poking him with microphones. "What happened in the 8th, John? Injury? Fatigue?" "Just a bad day," he muttered, waving it off. But it wasn't just a bad day. That was the end. The house was quiet. Emmy returned later, around midnight, when John was sitting in the living room with a bottle of beer, looking at the turned-off TV. She walked in, threw her bag on the table, and looked at him. "You're early," she said, as if nothing had happened. "You kissed him," he said without looking up. His voice was even, but inside he was seething. Emmy froze, then snorted. "What are you talking about?" she asked, but her tone gave her away. "In the stands. Everyone saw it." "I saw," he said, finally looking at her. Her face turned pale, but she quickly pulled herself together. "It was just a friendly kiss, John." "You're blowing everything out of proportion again," she said, crossing her arms. "You're paranoid, as always." "Friendly?" he barked, standing up. Beer spilled on the carpet, but he didn't care. "Do you think I'm blind? It was on screen, Emmy, to the whole stadium." She took a step back, her eyes sparkling. "So what? Maybe I'm tired of pretending that I'm happy with you. You're always busy, and I'm suffocating in this house," she shouted. "At least Brandon sees me as a woman and not a trophy." The words hit me like a ball to my chest. John opened his mouth, but didn't say anything. He looked at her anger, at her beauty, at everything he loved and was now losing. She grabbed her bag and went into the bedroom, slamming the door. John remained standing, feeling the tremor return to his hand. He clenched his fist, but it didn't help. The next day, the newspapers tore it to shreds. "Mitchell blows key game. Rangers star loses touch." What happened to John Mitchell? No one wrote about Emmy and Brandon. It was a personal drama, not for the headlines, but John knew that rumors were already creeping. The team was silent in the locker room, avoiding his gaze. Washington called him into the office. "What happened to you yesterday?" he asked, looking over his glasses. "You looked like you were run over by a truck." "Personal," John muttered. "It won't happen again." "It would be better if it didn't happen again," said Washington. "We have the playoffs right around the corner. Get yourself together or sit on the bench." John nodded, but nothing was coming inside. The morning after the game against the Angels began with silence, oppressive, empty, like the house in which John now lived alone. Emmy left, leaving a note saying, "I need time," and an empty closet in the bedroom. Her shoes, dresses, cosmetics, everything disappeared, as if she had never existed. John sat on the living room couch, looking at the crumpled note he had pulled out of the trash last night. "The bottle of beer I started yesterday sat on the table, warm and untouched." His hand trembled, a tremor that had begun on the field that would not go away, a reminder that he had lost control. He didn't sleep. His phone flashed with messages from his mother, from his agent, from his teammates, but he didn't open them. For what? Everything he wanted to say stuck in his throat like a lump of dust from Lubbock. By noon, he forced himself to get up. A stranger was reflected in the bathroom mirror. Bags under the eyes, stubble, a face as pale as a ghost. He splashed water on his face, but it didn't help. The tremors in his right hand intensified as he tried to clench his fist. "It's nerves," he told himself, but a voice in his head whispered something else. "You're broken." The day passed in a fog. The Rangers gave him the day off after yesterday's failure, but he was due to report to training tomorrow. The playoffs were just around the corner, and the team couldn't afford a weak link. John knew this, but the thought of sex made him feel sick. He turned on the TV. A sports channel was playing replays of the match. His face flashed on the screen. Tense, lost, and then that throw that cost them victory. The commentator said something about an unexpected decline in form, but John turned off the sound. He didn't want to hear himself being torn apart. By evening, he opened another beer, then another. Alcohol didn't relieve the pain, but it dulled it, like an old blanket thrown over sharp corners. He sat in the backyard by the pool, looking at the stars. The ball thrown 2 days ago was still floating in the water, swaying on the waves from the wind. John thought about jumping there, drowning himself in the cold, but even that wasn't strong enough. He simply drank until the bottles were gone and the sky turned gray from dawn. The next day he appeared at the stadium. The locker room was buzzing. The guys were joking, slapping each other on the back, getting ready for training. But when John entered, the conversations died down. His locker was in the corner, next to Mike Napoli, who nodded to him but didn't say anything. John pulled on his uniform, feeling the fabric cling to his sweaty skin. The tremor in his hand did not go away. He hid it in his glove, hoping that no one would notice. Coach Bob Haley, a rugged veteran with a face as if carved from oak, was waiting for him on the field. Haley was an assistant coach, but to John he was more than that, a man who saw him not only as a player, but as a guy from Texas fighting for his dream. He called John over, crossing his arms. "What's going on with you, Mitchell?" he asked, narrowing his eyes. "Yesterday, you were like a zombie. You don't look any better today." "It's okay," John lied, looking at the ground. "I'm just tired." "Tired?" Haley spat in the grass. "Don't lie to me, guy. I saw your throws. You're not tired. You're falling apart. Tell me what happened, or I will find out myself." John clenched his jaw. He didn't want to talk. He didn't want to be pitied. But Haley looked at him as if he saw right through him, and it broke him. "Emmy," he finally managed. Haley frowned, but wasn't surprised. He nodded, as if he had expected something like this. "Damn," he said quietly. "This is bullshit, John. But you can't let her drag you down. We have playoffs in a week." "I know," John muttered. "I can handle it." "It doesn't look like it," Haley snapped. "Go up the hill. Show me what you have left." John walked out onto the pitcher's mound, feeling the team's eyes on him. He took the ball and tried to concentrate. The first throw is a fastball, weak, gone to the side. The second is a slider that trembles like a leaf in the wind. The tremor tore his hand, and the ball fell, not reaching the zone. Haley shook his head. "Enough," he shouted. "You're distant. Go home, sort yourself out." John wanted to object, but the words stuck. He left the field, feeling the ground disappear from under his feet. In the locker room, he threw his glove into the locker and sat down, covering his face with his hands. Napoli came over and sat down next to him. "It's because of her, right?" he asked quietly. "I saw what was in the stands." John nodded without looking up. "Hold on, brother," Mike said, clapping him on the shoulder. "She's not worth it." But John didn't know if anything was worth it at all. The days merged into one blur. Emmy didn't call or write. John heard from mutual friends that she was living in a hotel in downtown Dallas, but did not look for her. He didn't want to see her face, didn't want to hear excuses. The house became a prison, huge, empty, with the echo of her steps in every corner. He stopped cleaning. Bottles of beer were piled on the table, pizza was rotting in boxes, the curtains remained closed. The TV was on in the background, but he wasn't watching. The sports channels played replays of his failure, and every time he saw his face on the screen, he turned off the sound. The tremor did not go away. He tried to throw the ball in the yard, but his hand did not obey. Each unsuccessful throw was like a blow to his pride, to his dream. He began to drink more, not for pleasure, but to drown out his thoughts. Whiskey in the morning, beer in the evening, something stronger at night from the bar that Emmy set up for parties. He did not leave the house, did not answer calls. The mother called every day, leaving messages. "Johnny, talk to me. I'm worried." He listened to them, but did not call back. What could he say? That his life fell apart. A week later, the Rangers officially suspended him from the playoffs. The agent said on the phone, "They give you until November. If you don't get in shape, the contract may be renegotiated. Do you understand what this means?" John understood. This meant the end. but he just muttered yes and hung up. That evening he drank until his eyes were black, fell on the sofa, and woke up only in the morning when someone knocked on the door. It was Bob Haley. John opened the door, squinting against the light. The coach stood on the threshold, wearing an old jacket and cap, with a face full of irritation. "Damn it, Mitchell, you look like a bum," he said, stepping inside uninvited. He looked around the living room, the bottles, the trash, the smell of stale alcohol. "What is this, your plan? Drown yourself in this shit?" "Go away, Bob," John muttered, rubbing his temples. "I don't need a lecture." "I don't want a pitcher who gave up," Haley snapped. He grabbed John by the shoulder and pulled him towards the sofa. "Sit down. We will talk." John sat down, more out of weariness than desire. Haley sat down opposite him, looking at him as if he was going to shake the soul out of him. "I know what she did," he began, "and I know how painful it is. But you are not the first to be betrayed, and you will not be the last. Do you want her to win, to take everything from you?" "She already took it," John said, looking at the floor. "I can't throw the hand. It doesn't listen." "It's not a hand, it's a head," Haley barked. "You are killing yourself. I've seen guys who have lost more than you get back up. You can, but not here, not in this trash heap." John looked up. There was no pity in Haley's voice, but a challenge, the same one he heard on his first day with the Longhorns. "What should I do?" he asked quietly. "First of all, get out of this hole," Haley said. "I'll find you someone, a doctor, a psychologist, hell, even a priest. But you won't give up. Not with me." John nodded, not because he believed it, but because he didn't want to argue. Haley stood up, glanced at the bottles, and added, "And clean it up here. You're not a pig." He walked away, leaving John in silence. He sat for a long time, looking at the ball, which was still floating in the pool outside the window. Then he got up, took a garbage bag, and started cleaning up. This was the first movement forward in a week, small, but real. The morning was gray, with low clouds that hung over the city like a wet blanket. John Mitchell sat in his pickup truck in the parking lot of a nondescript building in North Dallas. The sign read, "Dr. Lynn Harris Family Therapy and Counseling." He gripped the steering wheel, looking at the front door as if it were a portal to the unknown. Bob Haley insisted on this 2 days ago. He handed John a business card and said, "Either you go there or I'll drag you away myself." John didn't want to. He was 26, an MLB star, not some wimp crying on the couch. But the tremor in his hand, the emptiness in his chest, and the failed season told a different story. He turned off the engine and stepped outside. Dr. Harris's office was small, with beige walls, a soft sofa, and the scent of lavender from the aroma diffuser. Lynn Harris was a woman in her 50s, thin, with short gray hair and eyes that looked too deep. She shook his hand, her palm was dry and warm, and pointed to the chair. "Have a seat, John," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Tell me why you are here." He sat down, feeling the leather of the chair creaking beneath him. He placed his hands on his knees, hiding his right one, which began to tremble as soon as he entered. "They forced me," he muttered, looking at the floor. "Coach said I had to deal with myself." "They could force you to come here," she said, opening the notebook. "But staying and talking is your choice." "What's happened?" John clenched his jaw. He didn't know where to start with the Emmy, with the match, with the tremor. Everything was one tangle that he could not untangle. Finally, he squeezed out. Lynn nodded, writing something down. Her pen slid across the paper with a quiet rustle. "Tell me about that day," she said. "How did you feel?" John frowned. He didn't like to talk about feelings, but her gaze did not let go, and he began, slowly, stuttering. He talked about the game against the Angels, about Emmy and Brandon in the stands, about the kiss that the whole stadium saw, about the tremor that started right on the slide, and about how he failed the throw. His voice trembled as he reached the end, and he fell silent, looking at his hands. Lynn put down her pen and looked at him. "Betrayal is a wound, John," she said, "and it doesn't heal on its own. But what you describe, tremors, failure on the field, is not only about her. This is about you. Something old woke up at that moment. Can you remember a time when you felt this way? He frowned, not understanding. But then the memory flashed like lightning. He was 15, standing in the kitchen in Lubbock, and his mother was crying over a note from his father. "I'm sorry, son, I can't take it anymore." Tom left without warning, leaving him and Linda in an empty house. John didn't cry, then he took a bat and went to the field behind the barn, hitting balls until his hands went numb. But at night he lay in bed, feeling something inside him trembling, as if the world had collapsed. "My father," he said quietly, "he left when I was 15. He just disappeared. I I don't know why this came up now." "Because it didn't go away," Lynn said. "When someone you trust leaves you, it leaves a mark." Emmy repeated the same pain, and your body reacted. Tremors are not just nerves. This is a memory. John clenched his fists, feeling the truth cut. He didn't want to think about the past. He buried it under home runs and contracts. But Lynn didn't let him get away with it. "Tell me about your father," she said. "What was he like before he left?" John sighed. He began to speak at first reluctantly, then more and more freely. Lynn listened, nodding, sometimes asking questions. "How did you feel when he didn't come to the game?" Or, "How did your mom cope?" John answered, and with every word something inside was released, not completely, but a little like air from a punctured ball. Sessions became weekly. John went to see Lynn on Tuesdays and Fridays, although each time he got into the pickup truck with the thought of not going. But he drove. She forced him to dig into the past, pull out memories that he had hidden for years. They talked about his mother, her strength, how she worked 12-hour days to feed him, and how he felt guilty for not being able to give her more sooner. About the school, and about Emmy, how he fell in love with her brightness, how he tried to build for her the life she wanted. One day in mid-November, Lynn asked, "Why do you blame yourself for her actions?" John froze. He sat in a chair, looking at his hands. The tremors had become less frequent, but still appeared when he was nervous. "I don't blame," he said, but his voice trembled. "Sorry," Lynn said. "You think that if you were better, earned more, paid more attention, she wouldn't have left for Brandon. This is wrong. Her choice is about her, not about you." He shook his head. "I should have noticed earlier. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't want to see." "It's human," she said. "We close our eyes to what we are afraid of losing. But now you see. What will you do about it?" John didn't answer. He didn't know. Emmy still had not returned. Rumors said that she was living with Brandon in his penthouse in downtown Dallas. John didn't check. He didn't want to know. But Lynn's words stuck in my head like a thorn. At home, he began to put his life in order. After Haley's visit, he cleaned up the garbage, but now he went further. He washed the floors, threw away the empty bottles, and opened the curtains. The light hurt his eyes, but he endured it. He stopped drinking, not abruptly, but gradually, replacing whiskey with water, beer with coffee. The tremors still came, especially at night, but John noticed that they got better when he moved. He started running in the mornings along the street, past houses with neat lawns, until his lungs burned. It wasn't a field, but it was something. Haley called once a week to check on him. One day, he said, "You look better. Ready to go back?" "I don't know," John answered honestly. "The hand is still. Not the same." "Then work on it," Haley muttered. "And above your head. You have a contract, Mitchell. Don't waste it." John nodded into the phone. He knew the Rangers were expecting him for spring training in February. If he doesn't get back into shape, his career is over. He started throwing the ball in the yard, at first slowly, just in the air, then into an old net that he hung on the fence. Each throw was a struggle. His hand trembled, the ball went to the side, but he did not give up. Lynn told him, "The body follows the mind." He tried to believe. Towards the end of November, he called his mother for the first time. Linda answered immediately, her voice shaking with relief. "Johnny, what's wrong with you?" He told her everything briefly, without details, but honestly. About Emmy, about the match, about how he almost drowned in himself. She listened silently and then said, "You are stronger than your father. Don't forget this. These words hit him deeper than he expected. He didn't feel strong, but he wanted to prove to her and to himself that she was right. Dallas, Texas, December 2011. Winter in Texas was mild, but that morning the air was bitterly cold, and the sky over the city hung low, gray and heavy, like a concrete slab. John Mitchell sat in his pickup truck in the parking lot of his lawyer's office, gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. He was 26, and today he had to sign the papers that would officially end his marriage to Emmy. He hasn't seen her since September, the day she left with a note saying, "I need time." Now the time is up. Her lawyer contacted him last week, demanding a meeting. John knew it was inevitable, but every step towards that door felt like a blow to the ribs. He got out of the car, pulled his cap further over his eyes, and entered the building. The office of the lawyer, Mark Davis, was on the third floor, a sterile place with white walls, leather chairs, and the smell of coffee from the machine in the corner. Mark, a balding man in his 40s with sharp eyes, greeted him with a handshake and pointed to a chair. "Everything is ready, John," he said, laying out the papers on the table. Her side sent their terms. "Do you want to watch?" John nodded, although he didn't want to. He sat down, feeling the leather of the chair stick to his jeans. Mark pushed a stack of documents towards him, neatly typed pages of legal jargon he could barely understand. But the key words stood out: division of property, alimony, 50% of joint assets. Emmy wanted half of everything: the house, his savings, even part of his bonus from last season. John clenched his jaw as he looked at the numbers. "Is she serious?" he asked, looking up at Mark. "Half? After what she did?" Mark shrugged, his face remaining neutral. "It's standard in Texas, John. A marriage without a prenuptial agreement means everything is divided in half. She may want more if she goes to trial, but I think she wants to finish quickly." John looked at the papers. The house cost $1.2 million, of which he only paid off a third of the mortgage. Savings about $800,000 after taxes and her expenses. Half that means $400,000 will go to her, plus part of the house that he did not want to leave. But the thought of the trial, of sitting in the courtroom, listening to her lies, seeing her with a lawyer, was unbearable. "Let him take it," he finally said, taking the pen. "I just want this to end." Mark nodded without arguing. John signed the papers. His signature came out sharp, angular, as if he had carved it with a knife. Mark collected the documents, shook his hand, and said, "It will take a couple of weeks to process. You're free, John." Almost. Almost, John thought as he left the office. He went down to the pickup truck, got in, and sat for a long time, looking at the empty parking lot. There was no feeling of freedom, only emptiness, cold and heavy, like a stone in the chest. He returned to the house, the same one that would soon cease to be his. Emmy didn't show up, but her presence was still there. Scratches on the parquet floor from her shoes, a wine stain on the carpet, empty shelves in the closet. John walked around the rooms, feeling like a stranger. He didn't want to stay here. Too many memories, too much pain. The next day he called the real estate agent and said, "Sell it. I don't care how much." The agent, an energetic woman named Carol, arrived an hour later. She toured the house, clicking her tongue over the pool and marble kitchen, and promised to find a buyer quickly. "With this location, it would cost $1 million, maybe more," she said. "Where will you move to?" "I don't know," John answered. "Somewhere easier." Carol nodded without asking questions. A week later, the house was put up for sale, and John began packing up his things. He didn't take much clothes: a bat with the initials TM on it, a couple of boxes of college and MLB trophies. He left everything else: the furniture, the appliances, her damn paintings on the walls. He didn't care. He rented a small, one-bedroom apartment in North Dallas for $900 a month. The move took a day. Movers brought his things, and he himself placed them in the corners. A bed, a table, an old TV that was enough. He stood in the empty living room, looking at the bare walls, and for the first time in months, he felt something like relief. This was not Emmy's house. It was his. The divorce was finalized by the end of December. Mark called on the 23rd, Christmas Eve and said, "It's all done, John. You are officially free. With coming." "Thank you," John muttered and hung up. He sat in his new apartment, looking at the blinking garland outside the window, the only thing that reminded him of the holiday. He didn't put up a Christmas tree or buy gifts. His mother called and invited him to Lubbock, but he refused. He didn't want to see her pity. Instead, he opened a beer and turned on the TV, which was playing an old Rangers game, not his, thankfully. The money from the sale of the house came in January. After paying off the mortgage and sharing with Emmy, he received about $300,000 less than he expected, but enough to live on. Emmy took her share, $400,000 plus half of her savings, and disappeared from his life. He heard from friends that she and Brandon were renting a penthouse in the center, but he didn't ask. He didn't care. Or he forced himself to think that it didn't matter. The tremors in my hand became less frequent due to sessions with Lynn Harris. They still met once a week, and she made him talk about the divorce, about how he felt without Emmy. One day, in early January, she asked, "What did you lose when she left?" John thought about it. He sat in her office, looking at his hands calloused, with a thin scar on his thumb from an old injury. "Her," he said. "And myself, probably. I thought we were a team." "And now?" Lynn asked, her pen hovering over her notepad. "Now I'm alone," he said. "And that's normal. Empty, but okay." She nodded, writing something down. "The emptiness is a place, John," she said. "You can fill it with something new. But first you need to let go of the old." He didn't answer, but the words stuck in his head. Let go. He tried. Every day he got up, ran in the morning, threw a ball in the yard slowly, carefully, so as not to scare away his progress. The tremor was still there, but the throws were becoming smoother. He didn't drink not because he didn't want to, but because he was afraid to return to the hole where Haley found him. Bob Haley called regularly, checking on him. In mid-January, he arrived at his new apartment unannounced, with a bag of donuts and coffee in his hands. "You look better than last time," he said, looking around the empty room. "But this place is like a damn cave. At least buy a sofa." "I have enough," John muttered, taking the coffee. Haley sat down on the chair that John had brought from the old house and looked at him. "Spring training is in February," he said. "The Rangers are waiting for you. Ready?" "The hand is not the same yet," John said, squeezing the mug. "But I'm working." "Work faster," Haley snapped. "The team needs you." And to myself. John nodded. He knew Haley was right. Baseball was his anchor, the only thing left of the dream he had built since childhood. He couldn't lose that either. By the end of January, he began to leave the apartment more often. He ran around the park, walked to the gym. Sometimes he took the ball and threw it into an old net that he hung near the house. People recognized him. "Hey, you're Mitchell." But he just nodded and moved on. The fame faded after the failure in September, and the newspapers no longer wrote about it every day. It was a relief. One day he went to a local bar not to drink, but just to sit among the people. He ordered a Coke and watched the guys play pool, laugh, and argue about football. It was ordinary, just like life in Lubbock. He felt a pang of nostalgia, but not sadness. For the first time in months, he didn't think about Emmy every minute. Dallas, Texas, February 2012. It was a clear morning with a light frost crunching underfoot as John Mitchell stepped out of his North Dallas apartment. He was 27, and for the first time in months, he felt more than just a shadow of his past. The tremor in my hand had almost gone away, a faint echo remained, but the throws in the yard became smoother and more confident. He didn't return to the Rangers' spring training camp after a call with his agent in January made it clear the team wasn't willing to take a chance on him after failing to make the playoffs. The contract was frozen, giving him time to recover, but John knew his days as a pitcher might be over. It should have broken him, but instead he felt strangely relieved. Maybe Lynn Harris was right, the emptiness was a place he could fill with something new. A week ago, Bob Haley called him. The coach, as always, spoke directly. "There's work, Mitchell. Not on the field, but nearby. A local network, Fox Sports Southwest is looking for a baseball analyst. I said you'd come over. Go there, don't sit in your hole. John wanted to refuse. He didn't like cameras, didn't like talking. But Haley added, "You know the game better than half of these clowns in suits. And you need money. I sold the house. The contract is pending. What next?" It hurt. John agreed to the meeting, more out of respect for Haley than out of desire. And now he was going to his first interview wearing jeans and a dark shirt. The Fox Sports Southwest office was located in downtown Dallas, in a glass building overlooking Fountain Place. John walked into the lobby, feeling out of place among the people in suits and badges. He was met by the producer, a guy in his 30s named Travis Miller Thin, with disheveled hair and energy as if he had drunk 3 coffees in a row. "John Mitchell, huh?" Travis said, shaking his hand. "Damn, I watched your Rangers games. That slider against the Yankees in 2010 was something. It's a shame you don't quit anymore." "Yes," John muttered, not knowing what to answer. "Life." Travis nodded as if he understood and led him into the studio. It was a small room with a green screen, a table and cameras that looked at him like prying eyes. Travis explained, "We need someone who understands the game from the inside. Not just the ball flew away, but why it flew away, what the pitcher did wrong. Can you do it?" John shrugged. "I'll try." They gave him a text a recap of the Rangers versus Astros game from last season. John sat down at the table, looking at the paper. The words seemed foreign, but he began to speak, slowly, haltingly, about how the pitcher had chosen the wrong throw, how the batter had read his movement. Travis listened, nodding, and then clapped his hands. "It's not ideal, but there's potential," he said. "You're raw, but that's even better. People love authenticity. Let's try again without the paper." John nodded, feeling sweat pooling under his shirt. The second time was easier. He talked about what he knew, about the tension on the slide, about how the hand should obey, about how one wrong step ruins everything. When he finished, Travis smiled. "You're in. Let's start with March, spring games. 40,000 a year, plus bonuses if the ratings go up. Is it coming?" John nodded. It was less than his MLB contract, but more than nothing. He shook hands with Travis and walked away, feeling something stir within him, not pride, but a hint of it. The first broadcast was scheduled for March 5th, an exhibition game between the Rangers and the Cleveland Indians. John spent weeks preparing, watching old games, reading statistics, practicing speaking in front of a mirror. Lynn Harris helped during the sessions. They sorted out his fear of the camera, his feeling that he was not worthy of being heard. "You're used to proving yourself with action," she said one day, looking at him over her glasses. "Now you need to prove it with words. It's the same fight, just a different field." He nodded, although doubts gnawed at him. The night before the broadcast, he barely slept, sitting in his apartment with a mug of coffee and a stack of notes. In the morning, he put on a suit, his first in years, dark blue, bought at Nordstrom for $200, and went to the studio. Travis greeted him with a smile. "Don't tense up," he said, patting John on the shoulder. "Be yourself. People will feel it." The studio was bright, with hot lights and the smell of wires. John sat down at the table next to the host, a woman named Kelly Nash Tall, with brown hair and a voice that cut the air like a knife. She smiled at him, but he saw a slight doubt in her eyes. A newcomer, a former player, can he do it? The match started at 13 o'clock. Kelly opened the broadcast by introducing him. "With us is John Mitchell, ex-Rangers pitcher, now our new analyst." John nodded towards the camera, feeling his throat go dry. The first inning went smoothly. He was silent while Kelly led, but then she turned to him. "John, what can you say about Rodriguez's throw?" "Fastball into the zone, but the batter read it." John swallowed, looking at the screen. He's seen it 1,000 times, a pitcher who's too predictable. "He showed his hand too early," he said, trying to keep his voice level. "The batter knew there was a fastball coming, and he just waited. Rodriguez needed to disguise the move or go for a curve." Kelly nodded, smiling wider. "Great. What would you do in his place?" I would mix it, John said, relaxing. Curvy ball low, then slider. I would keep him guessing. The broadcast went on, and John spoke more freely. He analyzed throws, movements, mistakes, everything he knew from the inside. By the end of the match, Rangers won 4-2. He even smiled when Kelly patted him on the shoulder. "You're straight, Mitchell," she said when the cameras turned off. "A little wooden, but it will pass." Travis was pleased. After the broadcast, he took John aside. "Viewers write on Twitter they like your style. A real pitcher, not a talker. Keep it up." John nodded, feeling warmth in his chest for the first time in a long time. It wasn't a field, but it was close. He was talking baseball again, and people were listening. Work became an anchor. The broadcasts went on 2 or 3 times a week, and John got used to the studio, to the lamps, to Kelly's voice, which set the rhythm. He learned to speak more briefly, more precisely, but preserved himself no pretentious phrases, only what he knew. The audience began to recognize his voice, his face. Sometimes he would catch tweets. "Mitchell knows what he's talking about," or "It's a shame he's not playing, but it's cool to listen to him." It didn't fill the void completely, but it did give purpose. One day, in late March, he drove to Lubbock. His mother had been calling for a long time, and he decided it was time. Linda met him on the porch of their old house. She hugged him. Her arms were thin but strong. "You look better, Johnny," she said, looking into his eyes. "I saw you on TV. You speak well." "I'm trying," he muttered, sitting down at the table. She placed a plate of fried chicken and potatoes in front of him, his childhood favorite. They talked for a long time about her work, about her neighbors, about how proud she was of him. He talked about the divorce, about the new job, about how he was learning to live again. Linda listened, nodded, and then said, "You have always been stubborn, like your father, but better." He would be proud. Mitchell was standing in the parking lot of Driscoll Field, a small field in suburban Dallas that was hosting a charity game to benefit a children's hospital. He was 27 and felt almost alive. His job as an analyst for Fox Sports Southwest had given him a new rhythm, and the tremor in his hand became a rare guest, appearing only in moments of fatigue. Today, he was here not for the broadcast, but as a participant. Local organizers invited him to play for the Texas Stars team, assembled from former athletes and local celebrities. John agreed, more out of duty than desire, but the thought of going out on the field again awakened something long forgotten in him. He arrived an hour before kickoff, wearing jeans and an old Rangers t-shirt, with a bag containing his uniform and bat. The stadium was modest stands with a couple of thousand seats, a shabby field, but it was already buzzing with bustle. Children were running with balloons, volunteers were handing out programs, and the smell of hot dogs was in the air. John walked to the locker room, feeling the glances. They recognized him, whispered, "It's Mitchell, that pitcher." He nodded, but didn't stop. The fame had faded, and that suited him. In the locker room, he was met by the organizer, a stocky man named Dan with a thick mustache and a loud voice. "Glad you're with us, John," he said, slapping him on the shoulder. "You're on our pitcher's mound if your arm can hold it. Don't stress, it's for fun." "We'll see," John muttered, pulling on his uniform. He hasn't thrown professionally since September, but backyard training has given him some confidence back. Maybe he won't fail in front of the crowd. The team came together quickly. A couple of ex-minor league players, a former basketball player, a local radio host with a beer belly. The opponents, the Dallas Heroes, were the same, a team of firefighters, teachers, and one soap opera actor. John looked at them through the locker room window and thought this wasn't MLB, but damn, it looked like home. The match started at 14 o'clock. The stands filled not to capacity, but enough to create noise. John walked out to the mound in the first inning with the ball in his glove. His uniform blue, with the words "Stars" on it, fitted a little tighter than before, but he didn't pay attention. The first batter, a square-jawed fireman, tapped his bat on the ground. John threw a fastball, weak but accurate. Strike. The crowd clapped, and he exhaled. The second throw is a slider that goes to the side. Ball. The third is a curveball, slow but deceptive. The batter swung and missed. Out. John smiled at the corner of his lips, his hand obeyed. He went 3 innings, allowing only 1 run. The tremor did not return, and each throw was like a breath of air after a long dive. In the fourth, he was replaced not because of fatigue, but to give others a chance. He sat on the bench, rubbing his shoulder, and watched the radio host clumsily hit the ball. It wasn't his field, it wasn't his stands, but it was baseball, and he felt alive. After the 5th inning, when the score was 4-3 in favor of the Stars, John went to the kiosk to get water. The crowd around was buzzing, children were running around with cotton candy, and the sun was hot on the back of my head. He was standing in line when he heard a voice behind him. "You shot well for a guy who doesn't play anymore." He turned around. A woman stood in front of him, short, with dark hair tied in a ponytail, wearing a simple white t-shirt and jeans. Her eyes, brown and sharp, looked at him with slight mockery. A badge hung around his neck. "Rebecca Nolan, sports physician." "Thank you," John muttered, not knowing what else to say. "Just warmed up." "Have you warmed up?" she repeated, raising an eyebrow. "You looked like you were ready to return to the MLB. Although they say you are now a TV star." He frowned, but her tone wasn't angry, more like teasing. She extended her hand. "Rebecca, I'm here with the hospital, making sure no one breaks their neck for charity." "John," he said, shaking her hand. Her palm was warm, with slight calluses not like Emmy's, always soft and well-groomed. "Are you a doctor?" "Physiotherapist," she clarified. "I work with injuries and rehabilitation. I saw your games at Rangers. It's a shame you left." They started talking, first about the match, then about baseball. Rebecca knew the game not like a fan, but like a professional who knew the moves, the muscles, the mistakes. She said that she works with local teams, helping players after injuries. "Your shoulder is tense," she said suddenly, looking at him. "You spare him when you abandon him." "Old injury?" John froze. He didn't tell anyone about the shoulder, even Haley only knew about the tremor. "Maybe," he muttered. "Is this important?" "If you want to throw further, yes," she said. "I could take a look. Free for charity." He wanted to refuse, but her directness hooked him. There was no pity, only business interest. "Maybe later," he said, and she smiled not widely, but warmly. "Here," she said, handing him a business card, "if you change your mind." He took the card, a simple one, with her name and number, and nodded. She went to the stands, and John looked after her, feeling something strange, not a spark, but a slight push, as if from the wind. The match ended in victory for the Stars 6-4. John hit a single in the 7th inning, and the crowd clapped, but he felt no triumph, only weariness and quiet satisfaction. After the game, he stayed to help volunteers clear trash from the stands. It was none of his business, but he didn't want to go home to an empty apartment. He noticed Rebecca at the exit. She was checking the knee of some guy from Heroes who had a bad fall. Her movements were precise, confident, and John found himself staring longer than necessary. When it was over, he walked up to her. She stood by her old Honda Civic, throwing her bag into the back seat. "Good game," he said, not knowing why he approached. "You too," she answered, closing the door. "I didn't expect that you could still throw like that." "Me too," he said, and for the first time in months he smiled not forcedly, but naturally. They stood silently, looking at each other. Then she said, "Call if you just want coffee. I don't bite." "I'll keep that in mind," he answered, feeling warmth in his chest. She got into the car and drove away, and John remained in the parking lot, looking at the business card in his hand. At home, he put the business card on the table, next to the bat. Work on television went on as usual: broadcasts, analysis, arguments with Kelly Nash about who is better, the Rangers or the Yankees. But that day on the field added something new. He began to quit more often, not for the sake of returning, but for his own sake. In the park, in the yard, with the same mesh on the fence. The hand obeyed, the shoulder ached, but it was tolerable. He thought about Rebecca's words about tension, about trauma. Maybe she was right. A week later, he saw her again by chance, in a cafe not far from the studio. She sat by the window with coffee and a laptop, frowning at the screen. John came in, ordered a Coke, and walked over. "Job?" he asked, nodding towards the laptop. She looked up, surprised, but smiled. "Yes, reports. I hate papers. And you?" "Break," he said. "Broadcast in an hour." "Sit down," she said, pulling up a chair. He sat down, and they started talking about the match, about her work, about how she once adjusted a dislocated player right on the field. She was witty, direct, without the glossy falseness that he had become accustomed to with Emmy. John listened and laughed, quietly but sincerely. When he went on air, she said, "See you, Mitchell." "Definitely," he answered, and this time the smile stayed with him until the studio. The morning started as usual, jogging in the park, coffee from an old coffee maker, news in the background. John turned on the TV while he fried eggs and idly listened to the morning show on the local channel. The presenters, a pair of chatty blondes with forced smiles, discussed the weather, then switched to sports. John looked up when he heard a familiar name. "And now for news from the world of the NFL," the woman said, flashing her teeth at the camera. Brandon Ross, star of the Dallas Cowboys, suffered a serious injury in practice last week. Anterior cruciate ligament rupture, doctors say. This could put an end to his career. "What do you think, Mike?" Her co-host, a balding guy in a bright tie, shrugged. "Tough, Katie." Ross was at the peak, a contract for $20 million, advertising, the face of the team. But such injuries, he may not return, and his wife, Emmy Mitchell, ex-wife of Rangers John Mitchell, doesn't seem happy. John froze, the fork with the egg hovering in the air. Emmy. He hadn't heard from her for months. After the divorce in December, she disappeared from his life, leaving only an empty closet and a bank account. Now her name appeared again, like a ghost. He put the plate on the table and turned up the volume. "She was on some talk show yesterday," Katie continued, flipping through her tablet. "She looked, let's say, tired. She talked about Brandon's support, but the camera didn't catch her in the best light. Here, look." A shot appeared on the screen. Emmy in the studio, in a tight dress, with dull hair and shadows under her eyes. She smiled, but the smile was forced, as if it was held on by tape. John looked at her, feeling a strange mixture of pity and emptiness. This was not the Emmy he knew, bright, confident, always the center of attention. She said something about hard times and faith in Brandon, but her voice was shaking and her hands were nervously fiddling with the bracelet. "It looks like their fairy tale is falling apart at the seams," Mike said with a chuckle. "Ross without football is not the same golden boy. I wonder how they'll get out of it." John turned off the TV. He didn't want to gloat, that was beneath him, but something stirred inside him. Not joy, but cold awareness. Her choice, her life, her fall. He took the plate to the sink and threw away the rest of the food, his appetite gone. The day passed in the studio. John reviewed the Rangers' match against the Oakland Athletics of 5-3 victory, with a couple of controversial moments from the pitcher. Kelly Nash, as always, egged him on. "Would you have taken that curvy ball in the ninth, John? Or would he falter again?" "I would throw the slider," he muttered, looking into the camera. He was too obvious. The broadcast went smoothly, but thoughts about the news did not let go. After the recording, he stayed in the studio, scrolling through Twitter on his phone. It was already buzzing. Brandon Ross has finished his career. Emmy Mitchell looks like $1 million, old. What's next for the golden couple? Someone posted a photo of Brandon on crutches at the Cowboys training center with a sour expression, Emmy next to him, wearing dark glasses and carrying a Louis Vuitton bag. John closed the app, feeling slightly nauseous. The next day, he met with Lynn Harris. The sessions became less frequent, once every 2 weeks, but he still walked around, needing her calm voice. He talked about the news, about Emmy and Brandon, about how it affected him. "How do you feel when you see her like this?" Lynn asked, looking at him over her glasses. "Nothing," he lied, but she waited. "Okay, pity, I guess, and anger." She chose it herself. "And you?" she asked. You chose to let her go. How does it feel now? John thought about it. He sat in her office, looking at his hands. The tremor had long gone, leaving only old calluses. Easier, he said finally. But it's strange. She's been a part of me for so long. She was part of your life, not you, Lynn said. You are building a new one. This is not her story anymore. He nodded. She was right. Emmy became a shadow, distant and alien. He didn't want her back, didn't want her pain. He wanted to move on. Dallas, Texas, August 2015. The heat hit the city like a hot press, drying the grass in the yard of John Mitchell's apartment to a crisp. He was 30 years old, and for the last 4 years his life had been slowly but surely getting back on track. And then there was Rebecca Nolan. They started dating 6 months ago, in February 2015, after a chance meeting in the same cafe where he first saw her with a laptop 3 years ago. Then, in April 2012, he did not call her after a charity match, but fate gave her a second chance. She sat at the same table, frowning over the reports, and he, plucking up courage, sat down with coffee and said, "Do you still hate papers?" She laughed, and from that day everything started spinning. Rebecca, a sports doctor, direct, witty, without a hint of falsehood, became his anchor. They spent their evenings together, dining out, watching old movies, sometimes walking in the park, where she would notice how he was sparing his shoulder and grumble that he was too stubborn to heal. For the first time in years, John felt like he wasn't alone. That evening, he returned home from the broadcast Rangers versus Astros, victory 6-4. Rebecca was there, sitting on the couch with a glass of wine and a book on physical therapy. Her dark hair was loose and her legs were tucked comfortably under her. She looked up when he entered and smiled. "You were good today," she said, especially when he said the Astros pitcher was throwing like a rookie. Kelly almost choked. "She asked for it," John muttered, throwing the keys on the table. He sat down next to her, reached for her wine, and took a sip. Tired. "Then go to sleep," she said, poking him with her elbow. "Or I'll make you sprain your shoulder." It creaks again. He grinned, but before he could answer, the phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, local, and John frowned. He picked up the phone, expecting an agent or colleague. "Yes," he said, leaning back on the sofa. "John, it's me." The voice on the other end was hoarse, tired, but tremblingly recognizable. "Emmy." He tensed, feeling Rebecca look at him. 4 years. 4 years without a single word, except for the occasional rumor about her life with Brandon, his injury in 2012, their fall from the top. John clutched the phone, old anger flaring up like a spark. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice becoming cold. "We need to talk," she said, and there was something new in her tone. Despair. "This is important, John. Very important." "Speak," he snapped. "I'm not going to play your games." Rebecca raised an eyebrow, but remained silent, putting her book down. Emmy coughed, and John heard her breathing heavily. "I have a daughter," she said finally. "She's 3.5. Her name is Alice, and she's yours." The words hit me like a ball to my chest. John sat up abruptly, nearly spilling his wine. Rebecca frowned, placing her hand on his shoulder. "What?" he squeezed out, thinking that he had misheard. "Alice," Emmy repeated, her voice trembling. "She was born in February 2012. I was pregnant when we broke up. This is your child, John. I know for sure. I did a DNA test." He counted in his head. February 2012, 9 months ago. It was May 2011. They still lived together, albeit on the edge. He remembered those months, her detachment, quarrels, his blindness. She could be pregnant, and he didn't notice. But why was she silent? Why did she lie? "You're lying," he said, his voice becoming hoarse. "You went to Brandon. This is his daughter." "I wanted them to think so," she admitted, and there was a hint of bitterness in her tone. "He was a star, John, with big ambitions. I thought it would be better with him for me, for her. But now it's over, and I need money. I want to apply for alimony." "Alimony?" he barked, standing up. Rebecca squeezed his hand, but he didn't notice. "You cheated on me, left for someone else, and hid my daughter for 4 years. And now you want money? Are you kidding? We have nothing, she shouted back, her voice breaking. Brandon doesn't play. He was kicked out of the team after an injury. We are drowning in debt. I can't do it alone, John. She is your daughter. You must help. He walked around the room, feeling anger and shock fighting inside him. Daughter, Alice, 3.5 years old, almost 4, a girl he had never seen. He imagined her small, with his eyes or her hair, and his heart sank. But Emmy, she stole these years from him, and now she asked for salvation. Why now? He asked, stopping at the window. Why not earlier? I was afraid, she said quietly. Brandon thought she was his. I told him so, and he believed it. But when everything collapsed, the injury, the debts, I took a test. He's not her father. You are her father. And now, we have nothing to pay for housing. You think I'll just give you money after this? He said, his voice icy. You took my daughter from me, Emmy. 4 years. I didn't want to, she shouted, and he heard tears. I thought it was better this way. You were broken after that match, John. You couldn't even cope with yourself. What would you do with a child? It's not up to you to decide. He barked, hitting the windowsill with his fist. The glass shook and Rebecca stood up, walking towards it. You didn't give me a chance. She sobbed, and the line went silent for a second. John breathed heavily, looking at the dark courtyard. Rebecca put her hand on his back, silently asking him what was going on. He shook his head, not ready to explain. Where is she? He asked finally. Alice. I want to see her. She's with me, Emmy said, her voice becoming quieter. But not now. She needs time to understand. She thinks Brandon is her dad. You won't decide when I see my daughter, he snapped. I'll find a lawyer. We will sort it out in court if necessary. John, please, she begged. I don't want a trial. Just help us. I'll send you a photo of her to prove that I'm not lying. He clenched his jaw. Photo. It wasn't enough, but it was better than nothing. We've arrived, he said. And don't think that I'll just give you the money and forget about it. This is not the end. He hung up the call, throwing the phone on the sofa. Rebecca looked at him, her eyes full of questions. What's happened? She asked quietly. Emmy, he said, sitting down and covering his face with his hands. I have a daughter. She's almost 4. She hid it all this time. Rebecca froze, then sat down next to him, putting her arm around his shoulders. Damn, John, she said. I don't even know what to say. Are you sure? She sent a photo, he said, nodding at the phone. A minute later, he beeped a message. John opened it, and a girl appeared on the screen. Dark hair in pigtails, gray-green eyes, his eyes, a slight smile, a teddy bear in her hands. Signed, Alice, 3 years, 7 months. He looked at her, feeling his throat tighten. She looks like you, Rebecca said, looking over his shoulder. Her voice was soft but firm. What will you do? I don't know, he admitted, without taking his eyes off the photo. I want to see her, but Emmy, I don't trust her. Then don't rush, she said, squeezing his hand. Talk to a lawyer. Make sure it's true. I'm with you, John. He nodded, feeling her warmth next to him. For the first time that evening, he exhaled, knowing that he was not alone. The night passed without sleep. John lay next to Rebecca, looking at the ceiling as she slept, her breathing even. He thought about Alice, his daughter, whom he did not know about. Anger at Emmy was seething, but underneath there was melancholy. He had missed 4 years of her life. He stood up, took the phone, and opened the photo again, studying her face. She was his, it was clear as day. In the morning, he called Bob Haley. The coach answered with a hoarse hello, as always. Bob, I need some advice, John said. Emmy called. I have a daughter. She's almost 4, and I didn't know. Haley cursed. Damn it, Mitchell. This is true. Yes, said John. I sent you a photo, and he wants alimony. Bitch, Haley muttered. Hire a lawyer. Mark Davis, he handled your divorce. And don't give her anything until you check the DNA. Thanks, Bob, John said, writing the name down in his head. Hold on, man, Haley added. It's crap, but you can handle it. John hung up, looking at Rebecca. She sat at the table with coffee, looking at him. "I'm with you," she repeated. "Whatever you decide." He nodded, feeling her support keep him afloat. In the morning, John called Mark Davis, the lawyer who handled his divorce. Mark answered cheerfully. "John, haven't heard from you for a long time." "What happened?" "Emmy called," John said. "I have a daughter, she's almost 4. She hid it, now she wants alimony." Mark whistled. "Seriously, prove paternity DNA test. If she's yours, we can demand custody. What do you want?" "Seeing her," John said. "And don't let Emmy be manipulated." "Then let's begin," Mark said. "I'll contact her lawyer. Do you have a photo?" "Yes," said John. "And she looks like me." "Okay," said Mark. "Give me a couple of days. Let's make an official request." John hung up, looking at Rebecca. She made coffee, glancing at him. "Everything will work out," she said, "step by step." He nodded, but everything was boiling inside. 3 days later, Mark called. Her lawyer agreed to the meeting. "Emmy wants money, but is ready to show the girl. Tomorrow, in the park near her house. Are you coming?" "Yes," John said, his heart pounding. Rebecca insisted on going with him. They arrived at a park in North Dallas, a modest place with swings and benches. The August sun scorched the asphalt as John Mitchell stepped out of his pickup truck in a small park north of Dallas. The air was filled with the smell of mown grass and children's laughter, drowned out from time to time by the chirping of cicadas. Disorder reigned in his heart, fear, guilt, and timid hope. He came to see Alice, a girl who, as it turned out, was his daughter. Previously, he had only seen her in photographs, but now he had to meet her for real. Alice sat on an old swing, clinging to the rusty chains with her small hands. Dark hair was pulled back into pigtails, and her slender figure was almost lost in a spacious yellow dress. Emmy stood nearby, lips pressed together. She looked tired and lost. Her eyes avoided John's. Rebecca stood next to him, a little behind him, with her hand on his back, quiet support, without words. "Hi, Alice," John said cautiously, taking a step forward. My heart was pounding in my throat, and my hands involuntarily clenched. I'm John." The girl looked at him with big gray eyes, his own eyes, and hugged the teddy bear to her. "Hello," she answered quietly, then hid behind the bear, as if protecting herself from a stranger. They spent only half an hour in the park, but for John this time stretched out for an eternity. He pushed Alice on the swing, told her little things about how he once loved to ride, how he used to chase balls in the old field behind the barn as a child in Lubbock. The girl listened in silence, nodding occasionally, clutching the bear so tightly that its ear almost came off. When the swing stopped, she slid off the seat and timidly looked up at him. At that moment, John felt a painful pang. 4 years could not be returned. He didn't even know what cartoons she liked or what her favorite color was. "I want to see her more often," he said quietly to Emmy as Alice ran off to the slide. "John," Emmy began, but there were notes of doom in her voice. She realized that the secret she had kept for so long had now come to light. "I don't mind, but we do everything according to the law," he snapped coldly. "Tests, guardianship, all issues will be resolved officially." He could no longer take her word for it. Years of lies and betrayal echoed with a prickly pain in my chest. Emmy remained silent. Rebecca squeezed John's shoulder without interfering. The warmth of her hand said, "I'm nearby." The September heat was gradually easing as John entered the Dallas County Courthouse. The fluorescent light gave an unpleasant pale tint to the skin, and the corridors smelled of coffee from the machine. His lawyer, Mark Davis, walked nearby, playing with a folder of documents. Davis's face expressed the calm of an experienced lawyer who had seen cases like this many times. Emmy sat in the witness box, wearing a strict dark dress, her hair combed back. Next to her is a lawyer, a middle-aged man with an impeccable hairstyle and a sleek face. He was stalling for time, asking Emmy questions about her difficult financial situation and the need for alimony. But when Mark took the floor, the situation changed. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said with emphasized politeness. Is it true that until recently you maintained that the father of the child was another person, Mr. Ross? I, I was afraid, Emmy answered, lowering her eyes. Were you afraid that if you confessed to Mr. Mitchell earlier, you would lose the financial support of the NFL star? Mark spoke evenly, without a hint of sarcasm, but Emmy flinched as if from a blow. It was. She swallowed. I didn't know what to do. The audience held its breath. Mark paused, then put a folder on the table. And yet the DNA test confirms that Alice's biological father is John Mitchell. And your common-law husband, Brandon Ross, has nothing to do with the girl. Moreover, your bank statements show that you. That's enough. The judge interrupted him, frowning. Mrs. Mitchell, you misled everyone, both the girl's father and Mr. Ross. The court considers this issue based on the interests of the child. Question, what is your current income? I have practically nothing, she answered quietly. Brandon lost his contract. We are in debt. The judge turned his gaze to John and briefly looked through the papers. Mr. Mitchell, do you confirm your readiness to take on custody and expenses associated with raising the child? Yes, Your Honor, John said, standing up. My heart was pounding, but my voice sounded firm. I intend to participate in her life, to provide everything she needs. The sentence was short and unambiguous. The court officially recognized John as the father and gave him the right of primary custody, stipulating a visitation regime for Emmy. She sat with her hands clasped, not arguing. There was understanding in her eyes. She could no longer manipulate the situation as before. When the judge announced the decision, John exhaled, feeling like a heavy slab had been lifted from his chest. He won this fight. But there was a more important battle ahead for the trust of the little girl who had known him only a few weeks. October turned out to be surprisingly mild. The leaves of some trees in Dallas have already turned yellow and fallen, covering the lawns with a thin, crisp carpet. John stood in the doorway of his apartment while a short girl, wearing a jacket and carrying a backpack, Alice hesitantly shifted from foot to foot. This is your room, John said, stepping aside and letting her go forward. She walked in, and the furniture was simple but cozy. A small bed with a new set of floral bed linens, a shelf of toys, most of which Rebecca had brought the day before, and a plush rug on the floor. Alice put down her backpack and looked at her father with a look full of questions, but without the same fear. Rebecca appeared at the door with a plate of cookies. Alice, do you want to try? With chocolate chips. The girl nodded, took the cookie, took a bite, and then smiled shyly. John felt his heart swell with tenderness. He realized that this was the first time he had seen her smile so close. Since then, the three of them have lived together. Not everything was smooth sailing. Alice was sometimes capricious, demanded to see Mom, and confused situations. She still saw Brandon Ross, considering him almost a family member. But Rebecca patiently explained that she now has two houses, and the main thing is that they love her. She did not try to take the place of Emmy's mother, but it soon became clear that Alice herself was reaching out to Rebecca, making friends with her, seeking her attention and protection. Sometimes in the evenings, when Alice fell asleep, John and Rebecca sat in the living room, drinking tea and talking about life. Nearby, against the wall, stood a time-worn wooden bat with the initials TM, a legacy that once connected John with his father and now reminded him that the most important match of his life was not at the stadium, but in his own home. November came with the first cool winds. As Thanksgiving approached, John suddenly felt tired. A new life, caring for my daughter, broadcasting on Fox Sports Southwest, everything required strength. And thoughts about the past did not let go, catching me at the most inopportune moments. One evening, when Alice was already asleep and Rebecca was on duty at the hospital, John picked up the phone and called his mother in Lubbock. "Hello, Mom," he said, hearing her tired but familiar voice. "Johnny, dear, how are you there? How is your granddaughter?" There was undisguised joy in Linda's voice. He didn't immediately find the words. He said that he had Alice, that they were coping, that Rebecca was a miracle. The mother listened, occasionally interjecting, "You've done well," or "Take care of yourself." And suddenly John said what he had been thinking about for a long time. "Mom, I forgave my father. I don't even know why." His voice broke, but he continued. "I just realized that if I don't let it go, I won't be able to move on." Linda was silent for a few seconds, then quietly answered. "I'm glad, son. I also forgave him a long time ago. We must live on and not in the shadow of other people's mistakes." After the conversation, John sat in the dark for a long time, remembering the eyes of his father, who had once abandoned him. He hated Tom for this act, but now, after so many years, he understood that he himself needed forgiveness, so as not to repeat the fate of my father, so as not to hold the poison of resentment within myself. He let go of the past, and it became easier to breathe. December hit the midway point when cold winds brought a hint of possible snowfall, a rarity for Texas. Mitchell's apartment smelled of cinnamon and ginger. Alice and Rebecca were baking Christmas gingerbread. John watched them from the kitchen table, feeling the pleasant warmth of their laughter. "Dad, look!" Alice suddenly exclaimed, picking up a snowman-shaped cookie. And only a second later, the meaning of what was said reached John. He froze when he heard this simple "Dad," as if said to Alice for the first time in a low voice, as if it were something taken for granted. My heart skipped a beat, and a lump formed in my throat. "Dad," she repeated a little louder, noticing that he was not reacting. "Why are you silent? Look how funny the snowman is." "Yes, yes, of course," he said hoarsely, feeling his eyes fill with tears. "He's wonderful." Rebecca smiled and touched his hand, realizing what the word meant to him. Dad is short but important, like the last puzzle in a big picture. He carefully took the cookies, trying not to smear the still wet icing. Later, when Alice had fallen asleep and the house was silent, John led Rebecca into the living room. He took a small velvet box from his pocket and knelt in front of her. It was as if the whole world was holding its breath. "Rebecca," he began, feeling his voice tremble, "you came into my life when I thought it was all over. You helped me break out of the darkness, believe in people again. Thank you. I can't speak well, but you and Alice are all I have. Marry me." Rebecca covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes sparkling. Her yes sounded quiet but firm. John placed a simple ring with a small stone on her finger, the only thing he could buy without breaking the budget. However, it didn't matter. What was important was the gesture, the promise, and the new chapter in their lives. The first rays of the January sun reflected from the windows of the Dallas high-rises when John, throwing a sports bag over his shoulder, left the apartment. He had to go to the studio to analyze the upcoming baseball season. But he had very different news on his mind. Last week, Rebecca announced that she was pregnant. "Do you really want it to be a boy?" she asked then, with a sly smile. Yes," John laughed, hugging her. "I want to teach him to throw the ball and drive around the court." "What if it's a girl?" Rebecca narrowed her eyes. "Make friends with Alice, and there will be 2 princesses in the house." John thought about it in his mind and laughed. "Okay, let it be a girl. You know, I already have a wonderful daughter, why not 2? They joked about the future, argued in a half-whisper about who would be born and what to call it. Alice, having learned that she will have a brother or sister, clapped her hands and joyfully began to plan that she would read him stories about Bobo Bear. John looked at her, feeling a quiet but deep joy blooming in his chest. He could not have imagined such a future a year ago. Several months have passed. Spring gave way to summer, and in July 2016, heat struck Texas again. But in a small stadium in the suburbs of Dallas, where children of about 8 or 9 years old gathered, there was a joyful hubbub and a spirit of competition. The stands were low, but almost full. Parents supported the children, clapping their hands and shouting words of encouragement. John stood on the sideline wearing a sports cap and a t-shirt that said, "Coach Mitchell." He watched as his team, the Little Rangers, lined up in position. Among the players was Alice, now 5 years old, in a bright uniform and with pigtails, just like the first time he saw her. But now there was no fear in her gaze, only determination and excitement. Rebecca was sitting on the podium nearby, already in the last months of pregnancy, with a smile and a hand resting on her rounded belly. She met John's gaze, and he gave her a thumbs up. Everything was the same as it had once been in his distant childhood: the smell of field grass, the hum of voices, the cheerful anticipation of the game. Only now it was his field, his team, and his family. "Come on, Alice," he shouted as the girl took the bat. Her eyes sparkled. She looked at her father, now present father, and nodded, squeezing the bat tighter. The opposing pitcher threw the ball, and Alice hit it not perfectly, but enough to get the ball across the infield. John clapped his hands and Alice ran towards the base, causing the crowd to squeal with joy. Then there was a second blow, a third. The team was on its way to victory, but for John it no longer mattered. The main thing was that he was here, next to his daughter, next to Rebecca and the unborn child who would soon be born. When the game ended, the Little Rangers won by a narrow margin, but with a loud ovation Alice ran up to her father, out of breath and laughing joyfully. He picked her up in his arms, and Rebecca came up to them, carefully hugging both of them. Life found meaning not in victories at big stadiums, not in multimillion-dollar contracts, but in these simple moments. Children's laughter, warm hugs, the smile of a beloved woman. Last home run match took place not in the noisy Rangers ballpark, but here, on a small field in the suburbs, where happiness was measured not by the scoreboard, but by the love he had finally found. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think, click to the next one.